So today in Fearless Focus, I'm going to be talking about something that has been bothering me a lot lately. Actually, it's probably been bothering me a lot for about at least 8 years. And this is people who do not adopt what they know about the world in their lives. So there's many layers and many levels and many extents to which a person can actually do this. I'm going to spend a while citing some examples and talking about them and complaining about them because that makes me nuts. Okay, so let's say for instance you have an old cinema ticket and I offer it to you. You wouldn't take it, right? There's nothing to do with an old cinema ticket unless it's valuable for some other reason. If you can't go to the movies with it, you just don't want that piece of paper. So if I'm giving you a ticket to the movies and meanwhile I tell you, hey, this is a no ticket and it's not worth and it's not valid anymore, then you just stop taking it and you complain that I'm some sort of idiot or something. Well, this is what happens when you use the knowledge you have about something and apply it to your own life. What seems to me to be the case is that loads and loads and loads of people don't do that with regard to most practical things that they could be applying to their lives. So let me give you some examples. I think the main one relates to voting, and I've discussed it in my TED Talk. It's related to counterfactuals, which is something that I enjoy a lot and that philosophers study a lot. So counterfactual reasoning is the kind of reasoning in which, instead of reasoning from your actions to the consequences that your actions will have, here you reason instead, so what if I didn't do this? Would someone else do this, thus creating the same consequences? Or would something completely different unfold? So when you reason counterfactually, you're not reasoning causally. You're not worried about what you cause. You're worried about what would have happened if you didn't do that particular thing. You're taking replaceability considerations. And let's talk about voting then. So how does voting work? It differs from country to country, but let's say you live in a sufficiently big country. So there's like, say, 1 million people voting for candidate A or candidate B. Then what your vote is going to do is, if it turns out to be the case that the difference between candidate A and candidate B is 1 vote, not more than 1 vote, then your vote is going to change who is elected. In any other case, in absolutely any other case except for the one in which the difference between the candidates is 1 vote or in which they would tie, your vote does not make a difference, right? So I've known that for quite a while, and what did I do about it? It made me stop reasoning about who I should vote for. There is no point in spending my time into doing something that does not have a consequence. It may be the case, very, very few times, that someone will actually be elected by my vote. In 16,000 elections in the United States, it appears to have been the case once. So I usually do not do things that depend on a 1 in 16,000 times probability, because that's too small a probability to care about unless it was a probability of something really, really, really important happening. And definitely I'm not talking about a presidential election or a state election. It was probably just minor city election. So the trouble, and the thing that troubles me about all this, is that there's this friend of mine, And this guy's a very smart guy, you know. He's in my institute, he's very good, he's a great utilitarian, he reasons very well, he's very inquisitive, thinks about life a lot, and applies a lot of things to his life. Yet, even though he translated the text in which I wrote all of this, he decided to create a Facebook debate about to whom should he vote and why should one vote for person X or person Y. And this puts me wondering, you know, if a reasonable, rationalist, intelligent, high IQ, smart, cool, pragmatic person is willing to not only destroy his own time by doing something that does not have any counterfactual consequences, but destroy also the time of other people, then, you know, there's some level, even though it may be small, but there is some level of small degrees of incoherence that can penetrate even the toughest brains. And of course, this is only an extreme example, but you see it all the time, right? So, well, classic case scenario is the one in which people think that making more and more and more and more and more and more money and buying a bigger and bigger and bigger house, which costs exponentially more than a smaller house, is going to make them happier, even though they have read all the studies which call into the fact that this does not happen for the vast majority of people. So people worry a lot about things that do not correlate to happiness as much as they worry about the things that do, such as, say, smiling and wearing Botox and keeping 6 good personal intimate friendships and other things like that. So in positive psychology, this has always amazed me. The thing that has amazed me the most is that, you know, people learn a lot about how positive psychology reasons about the world, which is basically, you know, doing stats with big groups of people. And instead of trying to use, say, a massive amount of positive psychology advice, let's say you've read 20 of them, then you pick up the 18 that look more fitting to you and use them for a while, at least to test them. They just create a different reason for each one of the 20 tips or advices. And according to them, those are the reasons why they do not belong to the correct reference class for the problem at hand. Classic case is the children case, or, well, it's been known for a while that for each child that you have, even from the first, is going to detract about 7 points of your happiness on a scale of 10 to 100, which means, well, it's a little bit less than 8, which is the amount of happiness that would be decreased by the death of a relative, and quite a bit less than the amount of happiness you'd lose from separation, which is 12, and also less than health. But it's pretty much more than most other things if you're assessing it on a daily basis by beeping the person and asking them how happy they are at a particular moment. To take a comparative example, the amount of happiness people get from being with their children is on average equal to the amount of happiness that they get from cleaning their house, which is overwhelmingly less than cheering your friends and talking and drinking and maybe creating vlog videos, who knows. So what bothers me really is, say a person decides finally that astrology is stupid and that it doesn't make any sense, and yet they continue pursuing their astrological studies even though they know they're just pretending. I mean, if you're going to pretend, at least pretend doing something that won't make a lot of people who are less smart than you actually believe the thing that you're pretending. That's the kind of thing that evil religious leaders do, you know. What other cases are there of people not using what they know? Well, in health, this is a classic case. The thing about health is we have very strong and very violent instincts for eating preferences, and then there is some level of justification in the most basal reptilian brain for why people do not adopt diets that are more healthy. I myself have had trouble with that quite a few times in my life, trying to adopt a Kurzweilian diet, a diet of mostly high protein, low carbs kind. Well, even then, people would just pretend that studies or newspaper things that they've just heard do not apply to them. They just think about themselves as being a very different kind than all the rest of the world. So this may be for two reasons, right? One of the reasons is just the reference class thing. They may genuinely believe that they do not belong to the correct reference class. So a reference class is, say, if you're talking about cancer for women who are older than 50, then your reference class is women who are older than 50. And you may think that you do not belong to that particular reference class even though you're a woman and you're over 50, because your health habits have been particularly different during the entirety of your life, such as you've smoked 5 packs of cigarettes a day, and everyone in your family has a cancer history, and you really think that it's just by blind dumb luck that you don't have cancer yet, and you think that your likelihood of getting cancer is like twice or 3 times what would be for the rest of the women in that reference class, which is less specific than the group that you belong to. Okay, great. Reference class is a good argument, but it is the only good argument you may have for not applying something to your own life. So every single time you want to say, oh yeah, this is true for most people, or this is true for most, say, people who are studied, who are those people, like psychology undergrads? Okay, so this is true for most psychology undergrads. Why isn't it true for me? So if you don't have reasons that are obviously correlated with the thing that you're thinking about, you should not ignore knowledge about what gives people happiness, what takes away from people's happiness, what is more valuable in life, what is less valuable in life, if it comes from a reliable and good source. I want to think about more examples and about more specific people examples, which I have seen recently. Okay, so another classic one, I've talked about that in the last video, so the newspaper thing. So let's assume that you've noticed at some point that most of the newspaper news is actually about the next 2 or 3 days, and it's not going to be valuable after that, and that you've noticed that life includes this time-sensitive crisis in which you do not have time to do every single thing that you would like to, so you actually have to allocate priority in time. And even though people know both of those things, they still think that reading the newspaper is a worthy endeavor. Too bad. I mean, you end up losing a lot of time doing that. Facebook blocking software. This is self-evident. If you block Facebook during some times of the day, you're not going to die, you're probably going to be more productive, and your life is going to be more interesting, not less. And this is also true for any other addictive website you may rely or have touched upon. And then, what do? You do not block Facebook. Even though you have the software, you know it would be better, even if you actually tested it, you still do not block Facebook. Why? I mean, why? Okay, so that's one thing. On dedicating more time to close friendships, I think this is something that people undervalue a lot, especially in the English-speaking world. This is something that definitely must be retracted or considered. Jealousy is a case in point. Um, it always struck me as strange that even after someone studies sufficiently enough evolutionary psychology to understand the basic underpinnings of jealousy and why the basic underpinnings of jealousy no longer relate with the human condition, and they are sets of emotions that were evolved for particular purposes back in the day, they still think that being jealous is a valid, desirable, noble, even moral notion or way of being. I'm not claiming it isn't. I'm claiming it is up to you once you notice how jealousy was constructed and what jealousy is engineered for, to decide whether you would prefer to diminish the amount of jealousy that you naturally feel or to increase it. I mean, it's okay. So jealousy, in particular, it has evolved obviously to avoid having, in the case of women, their male spending resources in other women, and in the case of males, having to spend your resources on another male's child. So, in a world with contraceptives, condoms, and very different behavior from what would have been desired by the high Middle Ages, well, those would be unnecessary criteria for deciding whether to create or not an emotion. Jealousy is not the only emotion that does that. So when you understand what love is all about, you could engineer yourself to become more loving or to become less loving. And instead, people just try to take it from a very, very deep, instinctive, intuitive perspective. So it's a bad reaction to understanding how love works. When you see, okay, so this is one that bothers me a lot. People argue as if emotions were final explanations for behaviors. And this is stupid, right? Think about it. Oh, I did that because I was angry. But you were angry because of something. And anger has evolved for a particular thing. So, what is the thing that anger evolved for? Well, anger evolved for a lot of things, but one of them is so that when you have to explain whatever you are doing, and it is irrational and it is stupid or something like that, you can just claim that the reason was anger, and you don't have to keep reasoning back, even though you know that your anger was caused by something. So I don't like when people say, oh yeah, but that's just, I was angry or I was sad and this caused me to do this and that. Okay, this is true, this is nice, this is important, and I'm not claiming that those particular kinds of feelings, such as sadness and anger, are bad. It's just that you should not finish an argument by reasoning your way back to anger or sadness. It does not resolve the issue at hand. You may have a justification for whatever it is that you're talking about. You're fighting with someone over something. Then your justification cannot take the form blah 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 blah, reasoning causally back towards an emotion, found an emotion, stop, I win. This is not good reasoning. Good reasoning is, oh yeah, I have these and these and these reasons to do that, and also there is this evolutionary pressure which makes me very angry when this happens, because in the savannas something used to happen and then it makes me very angry. So just to take a more specific and literal example, which includes the jealousy thing. Let's say you feel betrayed by your girlfriend, and that makes you very, very angry, and then you hit her. Well, is the hitting justifiable? If you think that a line of reasoning which reasons back towards an emotion which you claim not to be able to control is a good enough line of reasoning to justify an action, then yes, hitting is perfectly justifiable, because you can just say, well, I heard of the news that you were doing this and that. Well, you don't even have to go about how that happened. You just say, oh, I was super angry, and because I was super angry, this gives me right to do irrational actions, and then one of the irrational actions that my body desired to do was hitting her. And then you hit her, and who cares about feminism, about women's rights, about love, and about anything else? I mean, you were angry, therefore you're right. So I don't like this line of reasoning. I don't think anyone should like this line of reasoning. So even if you have an emotion, you can take the emotion into account. You can claim the emotion has biased you towards a particular direction instead of a particular other direction that your reasoning detracted from that emotion would have led you, and that is fine. You can say that there is an instinctive pressure very strong to say eat sweets, or to be super angry when someone has sex with someone else. But if you know that you only want to eat sweets because that level of concentration of carbohydrates wasn't available in the savannas, or if you know that the only reason that is making you jealous is because in the old times that used to mean that someone is going to be living on your resources for the next 20 years and is not genetically related to you, then you do not have a good reason to hit someone, and you do not have a good reason to say that you should eat sweets. It may be the case that you will end up eating sweets anyway, but that's just because you can't control it. And it may be the case that you will hit someone anyway, but then it is not morally correct to claim that you just could not control it. You just have to spend a lot more effort and time and energy into being able to control some particular kinds of instincts because they have evolved for particular reasons. And I really hate when people do this kind of thing. I hate when people go about justifying their acts based on emotions. I, of course, forgive the case in which they have not studied psychology at all, or they have not studied evolutionary psychology, and then they don't know how their emotions might be exactly devices created by biological evolution to make them able to pretend slash justify slash betray slash be treacherous. But then once they know it, I don't think that they should have a right to keep doing the very same thing again and again.